Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, The Rise of Refund Fraud, How Food Delivery Platforms Can Fight Back. I'm David Nesbitt, your host for today's session, and I'm really excited to have our conversation today with our guest experts, Martin Chueke from PedidosYa and my CEO, Andre Faraz from Incognia. I've got to say, really glad that you decided to join us today. We're really happy to have you here for this conversation. As we go through the session, we'd love to hear your questions so we can make sure that you're getting the most out of this session. I know, everyone on this call is going to be maybe coming from slightly different places in terms of dealing with the issue of refund fraud on their platform. And so don't be shy, add those questions no matter what they are. We'll address them either as we go or we'll have a Q&A time at the end where we'll make sure to cover as many as we can. And in case you're wondering, we will be sending out the video recording of this session by email. So if you want to, rewatch it, share it with a colleague, feel free to do that. And we'd love to have you share it and get the most out of it that way. So first, let's do some introductions so you can get to know the three of us a little bit today who are talking to you. So like I said, I'm David Nesbitt coming to you live from Modesto, California, kind of between the Bay Area and the Sierra Nevada mountains on the other side. And I lead content for Incognia, and I organize our webinars, which have featured experts from platforms like iFood, Just Eat Takeaway, and Bolt. And on that note, if you're watching this webinar, you'd probably enjoy some of our other previous webinar topics on topics like driver fraud, promotion abuse, etc. So we'll make sure to link that out near the end of the session, how you can find more of those recordings. So next, I'm going to ask our two speakers today. I won't be talking a lot today, but they're going to be sharing a lot more. They're the experts on this topic. And so I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, share about their role and their company, and why they're particularly interested in the topic of refund fraud. So Andre, I'll have you go first.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Andre, CEO and co-founder at Incognia, based out of the San Francisco Bay Area, but now currently in the Sierra, so right on the other side of the state. Happy to be here. I've been working with multiple food delivery companies, and refund abuse has been one of the hot topics since last year. So excited for the conversation.
Thanks, Andre. Martin, let's go with you.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Martin Chueke. I'm from Argentina, born and raised in Buenos Aires. Well, first of all, thank you a lot for the invitation. I mean, this is a topic that affects most of the marketplace platforms, and not to say all digital platforms. So it's going to be really interesting. Speaking a little bit of myself, I have almost 10 years of experience in the fraud prevention industry, mostly in digital platforms. I've been working in fintech, I've been working in ride sharing, and in the last 4 to 5 years, I've been working specifically in the food delivery industry. So yeah, really excited about this. A little bit about my company that maybe you might not have heard about it if you're not from LATAM. So basically, PedidosYa is one of the biggest players in LATAM in terms of food delivery. We have operations in over 15 countries and are delivering 25 million orders per month. So it's quite a high volume operation for what LATAM represents in terms of market. And yeah, we're still growing and we're still seeing issues with refunds. So this topic is relevant as ever.
Thanks, Martin. That's great. Great context as well about your platform. So here's where we're going to go today. I want to talk a little bit about what we'll cover, give you a sense of what to expect. So we're going to start by setting a foundation about refund fraud in food delivery, looking at the different ways it occurs, excuse me, spanning from opportunistic fraud to more organized schemes. Then we'll discuss how to measure and detect refund abuse effectively. Get into topics like segmentation, detecting at the device level versus the account level, and the challenges of sifting out real refund requests from the fraudulent ones, some of the real tough part of this. And finally, we're going to wrap up with practical strategies for preventing refund abuse without driving away those legitimate, loyal customers. And we're also going to touch on how fraud and customer service can collaborate effectively on this, since that's definitely a challenge. So with that context, let's jump into our first topic. And let's see, there we go. So refund abuse, it's not just an occasional user exploiting an app to get a free lunch, as we all know. It's become a big revenue drain for lots of platforms around the world. So in this first section, we're going to look at common tactics, And Martin and Andre are going to help us understand exactly what's going on out there and how fraudsters are exploiting these refund loopholes that a lot of these platforms have. So, Martin, let's start with you. Could you set some foundation for us about just to kind of give some context? Why is refunding an important part of the food delivery industry?
All right, that's a good one. I mean, it sets out the context for everything that's going to come. Um, so the main thing is most countries have some legislation regarding digital services and refunds, but they don't usually, or at least in there's a lot of difference in what they specify as to require methodologies and processes. So most of that, or maybe sometimes all of that, is up to the platform to determine. So as e-commerce in general grows, I mean the adoption grows and the volume transactions they grow a lot. It's been happening particularly in food delivery also. What happens, what you see is that the competition intensifies. So platforms need to establish refund policies to build trust with the customers, but also to ensure user-friendly experiences and to make sure that the customers will return and choose a particular platform and not the competence. So yeah, delivering the best possible customer experience, even when there's been some maybe negative situation. So you have to take care of that. If you deliver a good experience, even when negative stuff happens, then you create a competitive advantage. And this advantage, you want it to translate into higher user retention, into increased purchase frequency, and overall improved satisfaction. All of this sounds like a lot of terminology, but basically it impacts the customer lifetime value in the platform and ultimately profits for the company. So that's basically a little bit of the context about why are refunds a thing in the fraud industry. Why do we care about them?
Yeah, that's really helpful context. Thank you. Um, Next, could you talk a bit about the different types of refund fraud? Like we said already, there's not just one type. There's kind of some different profiles, different types that happen. Could you describe what some of those are?
Yeah, what's really interesting about refund fraud is that most of the times when we speak about fraud, we are imagining uh, like professional fraudsters or dedicated fraudsters with a wide tool set and skills. And this is not the case in refunds. I mean, it can be the case, but we also see different patterns from more innocent kind of customers. So let me get started with the most innocent type of pattern, and from there I will go to the riskiest, at least from a categorization that I came up for this. So the most innocent is the what we call opportunistic fraud. It's basically customers that understand how the customer policies work, how the service and refunds operate inside the platform, and they exploit those policies to obtain free food. What you might see in these profiles is that they are not doing this all the time and they're not doing this at scale, but they're doing it often enough that we can notice. And when you start adding up every customer that makes a little bit of opportunistic fraud, then it starts becoming a big problem. After that, what we see is the same within the same type of people. Let's say it's a legitimate account, but what you see is they're not just being opportunistic; they're exploiting the policies to the maximum. So basically, they try and test the platform until you don't give them more refunds, or you kick them out, or give them a warning or something. But this is basically heavy users. So if you go to a marketing person, they will say, hey, this is a heavy user. They bring a lot of orders into the platform. But when you deep dive a little bit into it, you will see that the most of the orders have refunds attached to them. So once you see that, it becomes really clear. And I'm drawing a line here because we're jumping to what I like to call professional. I think is giving a little bit too much credit to the fraudsters, but uh, at this time we know that they are quite professional on what they do. Uh, and the fraud pattern changes a little bit. So what you see in professional fraudsters are organized fraud rings, and without I mean like big systematic schemes in which multiple fake accounts or maybe stolen payment methods are being used. So this is much more professional and wider scale. So you have to be aware of this because maybe it's as a small thing as an opportunistic fraud, and the fraudster discovers a loophole or a gap in your policies, and then suddenly they organize a fraud ring and start exploiting the platform in big scale. And finally, what's called collusion fraud. In the case of food delivery, the collusion can be like there's three parties to a collusion. Usually, in a marketplace, you will have a buyer and a seller. In the food delivery industry, you have a buyer, which is the customer, a seller, which is usually a restaurant or commerce, and you also have the drivers or couriers that can participate in that collusion. There's many examples of this, and since there's a three-way split in the logistics, collusion can take many forms, and we should be addressing all of them.
That's great. Yeah, collusion I think is a really interesting and tricky one. Important for platforms to be understanding this one, and like you said, it kind of morphs and takes different forms. Um, Andre, let's go to you next. Could you share about, let's kind of think about some actual practical real life examples. Could you share any examples that we've maybe found at Incognia or in the news maybe that are good examples of refund fraud at different scales?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the first example I have to share here is from a company that was testing our product, and we saw this while they were doing this test. And basically, what we found was that, for example, one single device, it was a Samsung device, accessed over 200 accounts and placed over like $5,000 in different orders. Um, they requested refunds for 83% of that. So they got back like out of the 5,000, they got back over $4,000 dollars, and and the platform actually granted all of those refunds, right? Um, so uh, this this person, we don't know what they did afterwards, but they probably sold these items and probably the food or whatever they were ordering. Um, so so yeah, and in fact, they got like $5,000 worth of inventory for just 800, which was what they effectively spent. Um, so this could be, I'd say, going back to Martin's definitions here, um, potentially like an opportunistic fraudster, right? So they found that vulnerability, they realized that it was very easy to request a refund, and they just did that multiple times, um, with some degree of sophistication, right? Because this person had to go through the process of like creating 200 accounts and accessing all of those accounts so that they were not easily tracked. Um, but but yeah, definitely a person who spent some time doing this, right? The other example here is more of a scaled example, a more, let's say, professional type of operation, as Martin pointed, um, which was this was in the news actually. Two guys in France, they got arrested because they were like defrauding a food delivery app, and they made over 2 million euros between 2022 and 2024, right? So like they did spend a lot of time attacking this platform. And basically what they did was they created a business on top of the fraud they were committing. So they created a Telegram channel called Fast Eats, where they were offering food at a very significant discount of 50% discount, and then people were ordering through that, and then they were placing the order on the platform using their fraudulent accounts, right? So basically, this was they became intermediaries between the Telegram group and the food delivery app, and they were managing like multiple accounts. They were leveraging bots to place the orders, and they were particularly focused on exploiting the first order refund policy, right? So the platform would not ask any questions if it was the first time you were requesting a refund for your first order, because the platform wanted to provide you with a good user experience, right? And they basically created a system to build multiple accounts, place these first orders, request a refund, and then build a pretty significant business on top of that. So yeah, a lot of automation, a lot of sophistication, and the after the investigation was concluded, they found that these fraudsters, they have created 137,000 accounts on the platform.
Great insights from both of you, and that's a that's a really wild example. It's mind-boggling to see how these kind of schemes can escalate, especially when they're, like you said, Andre, using automation like this. I remember maybe 6 months ago, or more, a little bit more than that, my colleague sent me an example that Fast Eats, they found it on like a fraud forum or something like that, and shared that example. We thought it was really interesting that someone had created this program, and then we saw this news story pop up a little later that they had gotten busted, and it was like 2.4 million euros that they'd potentially defrauded from this platform. Um, so it's crazy. You know, as we mentioned, platforms often have these customer-friendly refund policies, and they're designed to instill trust and loyalty. That's the goal. Create a great experience, like Martine's saying, but these policies can really become huge vulnerabilities if they're not protected correctly and if fraudsters figure out how to exploit them systematically. So now let's go to our next section here, measuring and detecting refund abuse. Now we've got a little bit more of a sense of the scope of this problem, what it looks like. Let's talk about how platforms can actually spot it and measure the impact. So we're going to explore some challenges around distinguishing legitimate refund requests from fraudulent ones, why some of the methods platforms might use would fall short, going beyond account level detection to device level detection. So Andre, let's start with you. For food delivery platforms, why is refund fraud particularly difficult to catch and stop?
Yeah, well, there are a few factors here. The first one is that um, the customer can claim different things when they're requesting a refund, right? So they can claim that, for example, there was an ingredient missing in their food. They could claim that the food was cold. So there's so many things, right, that you can say that you didn't like the what you ordered and you want a refund. That it's very difficult for the platform to verify. Like how is PedidosYa going to verify if your food was cold, right? Are they going to send someone to your house and and measure that in like less than 10 minutes? That's impossible. So it's very difficult. That would be the first piece. The second here is um, the the problem with refund abuse is that once the fraudster identifies this vulnerability, they create a system to do that at scale, right? And then the next challenge is how do you identify the systematic behavior, right? Because this fraudster, as we've seen in these examples, this fraudster might be managing multiple accounts at the same time, right? So if you're looking at it only from the account level, the two issues that I've mentioned, you would probably not detect anything, right? Because each account was only asking for one refund. So at the surface, everything looks fine. But then if you dive a little deeper and you look at other signals, for example, you might find connections between these accounts, and you might eventually understand these accounts are all being managed by the same person, right? So that's another thing. The fraudsters are finding ways to manage multiple accounts. Um, so I'd say those would be the primary um, issues here, which would be like one is very hard to verify if the claims from the customers are legitimate, and the second is it's hard to identify this type of systematic behavior.
I may chime in with a comment on this. Um, I would go as far as to say not only is it very difficult to determine whether a claim is real or not, it sometimes can be impossible. And not only from a fraud perspective, but also from a logistics perspective.
Yep.
Sometimes there might be an honest mistake. There might be an honest mistake made by the restaurant, by the rider, or by the customer. Maybe they say they thought they asked for for one additional item and they didn't, or the item did come and they couldn't find it on the bag or something. So the logistic problem is quite big. And when you add to that some ill intention from one of the three parties, usually in this case usually the customer, then it gets that much more complicated, because how can I tell if a customer is getting their meals frozen? I mean, that does it have to do with fraud, with performance, or is it the customer really far away? So there's lots of questions that arise from a refund claim. Some of them can be answered with fraud. Some others are very difficult to determine, even though there's not fraud. But that's really a really good point, Andre.
Yeah, that's tricky. There's not always a perfect answer. And that's a great thing to point out. Martin, let's go to you next. Question for you. What are some of the most effective methods that you've found for detecting refund abuse? And a follow on, are there any metrics or KPIs in particular that you found to be helpful to focus on?
Right. So yes, basically, well, before diving into KPIs, I would advise everyone that's approaching a fraud prevention strategy in refunds to develop a strong understanding of the platform. And when I say this, I mean the platform in its entirety. How's the user navigation inside the platform? How is the refund process? What do they have to do? They have to complete a form? Do they have to chat with an agent? Is it automated? So get really familiar with how the processes work, and also understanding, well, the processes for refunds, but also the budget. How much are you spending, and how much should raise your alarms if you see that it's going to a weird customer segment. So yeah, and I think I've spoiled a little bit of what I'm going to say about KPIs, but basically deriving from this understanding, uh, usually one might find a mix of 2 or 3 KPIs that really tells the whole picture, right? So basically, the refund rate. So how much refunds are you giving over the total amount of orders you're delivering? So if the refund rate increase over time, it could mean there's an issue with fraud. It could also mean there's another issue, but it's the first point to be alert from. Also, as I said before, the refund budget. So yeah, maybe it's growing, but the refund budget is not significant to me, so I wouldn't mind uh, putting it in the drawer or in the freezer for a while, and monitor it next week. But if the refund budget is significant for the company, then a small deviation in the refund rate could imply lots of losses. And finally, I would suggest like a segmentation of where is the money going. So you can come up quickly, probably knowing your platform, with some 2 or 3 variables to split the traffic and say, hey, yeah, maybe a huge part is going to trusted customers, or customers that have a good history and are making the first refund claim. This other part of the budget is going to new customers. As Andrew said, is usually a big issue. How you treat customers when they make their first order, and even more so when they make the first order and they allegedly have a problem in that order. So you want to retain them as much as possible. And yeah, and maybe there's a piece of the budget that's going to, well, customers with that maybe you haven't detected yet as fraudsters, but they're on the gray area. Another interesting thing is to see refund reasons. So why are we giving the refund? Is the food always cold? Are they missing items all the time? Is it a mix of everything? That will help a lot. And also, usually, policies are set based on what kind of problem the customer reports. So this is very important too. Uh, a spoiler alert on this, and you probably will find this on your platform if you look close enough. One of the favorite reasons for the fraudsters is the missing item, because the missing item is missing. You can ask for a picture of something that didn't come in the order, right? If there's a food quality issue, you might ask for a picture of it. Yeah, I mean, you won't be able to tell if it's hot or cold, but you can tell if it's in rotten or in bad quality, but not a missing item. Um, well, those are the 3 metrics, right? So refund rate, budget, and a segmentation based on reasons and maybe customer segments. In addition to quantitative metrics, I would like to add that a good technique for detecting refund abuse is the forensic investigation of key cases. How you come to obtain these key cases, it can vary. I mean, it can be a result of a deep dive analysis, or it can be escalated from another area inside the company. But there are some key cases that when you see them, like the full order life cycle, when they created the order, where is it going, like the full evaluation, then it's quite evident that there's something not common happening in that order. So the fraud team should leverage these insights in a professional way. Like the insights should spark a deep dive data analysis that should then be translated into an actionable strategy and maybe a refinement of the previous KPIs that I mentioned. So yeah, that would be my main approach in detecting refund abuse if you haven't started already.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I think I was looking at examples of like customers talking about getting denied refunds or something, I forget. And someone I think was talking about submitting pictures of like a temperature probe in their food to show them. So it sounds like, customers definitely driven, even if they're maybe like the honest ones even, are trying to find creative ways to really prove their case. Um, Andre, let's go back to you next. Question for you. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you think platforms are making when trying to detect and measure refund abuse?
Sure. Yeah, well, I'll start with one, which is related to what you just mentioned, which is relying only on user uploaded pictures, right? For example, Martin's example was great on missing items, right? Like how do you verify that like with a picture? Well, the item is not there, so how do you tell? So that would be one, relying too much on just pictures. The second would be not having an integrated fraud solution that helps detect collusion, because collusion is a big part of this. And there could be multiple types of collusion, right? There could be collusion between the customer and the seller, the customer and the courier, all three together, right? So if you don't have signals that are very similar and you're able to identify some connections between these different parts of a transaction, it can become very hard, right? So an example I have to share here is from another food delivery service. Customers were colluding with the delivery couriers, right? And they were claiming that they didn't receive the order, while the couriers were claiming they did receive, right? Um, so the scheme here was the courier would keep the goods. So this was not food delivery specifically; it was like more package delivery. So they were like um, sending like very high value and resellable items, like alcohol, for example, and electronics. So the courier was keeping that, and the customers was getting a reimbursement, right? So basically, the only one bearing the cost here was the delivery platform, because they were having to pay the merchant, reimburse the customer, and basically the courier was then reselling those items. And what was interesting was what we uncovered was that it was actually the same person. It was the same individual placing the order and using the courier app to accept that order and then claim that they have delivered. So these things can happen like even with the same person. Sometimes like the customer is recruiting some of the couriers, right, and then like doing a more distributed attack. Um, but yeah, if you don't have like something that can help you have a unified view of what's going on your platform, it could be tricky. And the same applies to also the way you manage your organization. Like sometimes the fraud departments at these companies are very siloed. So the people who are dealing with like driver related or courier related fraud don't even interact with the people who are looking into like the merchant fraud and the customer fraud. And that's an issue, right? Because if they're not talking, if they're not collaborating, they're not going to see these schemes. So that was another big factor that we've seen as a big mistake that some platforms are committing. Um, and then I'll point out another thing which is related to this, which is when it comes to like identifying shared signals. I'd say two things that are quite important and are helping us at Incognia um, um, help our customers detect this type of behavior is particularly focused on device and location signals. So in my previous example, what we found was that these things were happening all from the same device, right? So the same device was related to the customer account and the courier account. So basically, by having that visibility, we were able to uncover this collusion scheme. But sometimes the schemes are a bit more sophisticated, and you might be um, looking into other signals as well to detect relationships between different devices, right? And location plays a big role here, which is like if these two or three devices are frequently at the same locations, they probably have a relationship. And this is not really what you would expect from a courier and a customer, right? It's it's supposed to be almost random, right? You're going to place an order. You don't have no idea who's going to deliver that to you until someone accepts the order. So if you find relationships between the devices that are part of the transaction, something weird is going on.
Thanks, Andre. One more question in this section before we move on to our last section about practical strategies. Martine, a question for you. One of the approaches that platforms take to fight refund abuse is segmenting users based on risk of fraud. So I'm curious if you think this is a good strategy, and if so, what are some reliable criteria for doing this?
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, segmenting users is the bread and butter of a fraud prevention team in terms of analysis, is what we do. So basically, it is the right approach. You might not have the right segmentation, but you need for sure to segment your customers and make sure that you're targeting a population that's riskier than the average. That can be maybe focusing on new customers, as we mentioned before, but that's not the only risk segment that we see. So definitely, user behavior is one of the most important things. Um, I would piggyback on what Andre said. Once you kind of determine what kind of customer behavior you want to segment, then the risk signals of the attributes of the customer become more important. Andre specified device and location, which are essential. I mean, you can see once you target new users, for example, in a segmentation, you need to see, hey, how can I tell a legitimate new user from a fraudster new user? Well, if they share devices with other users or they share devices with the courier, then that's a big warning. If they are in a location where many new customers are created there and making orders and asking for refunds, then you got something there too. But those are not the only two attributes that I would mention. I think there are valuable insights that one can find when evaluating the payment methods. So, for instance, are they paying with a credit card? Is that credit card have I seen that credit card in a previous customer before, or is it a new card? Is the PIN number, does it make sense? Is it a foreign BIN? Is it a normal BIN? Is it a premium credit card? So there's a lot of that one can infer from the credit card, and the same can apply for the email or the phone number that the customer provides. So the same logic applies. Is it a known email? Is it a fake email? So yeah, you can work a lot with that. I would say that mixing a little bit of both answers, so uh, user behavior and risk signals that can come from all of the attributes that we mentioned. Uh, yeah, you have to mix those two approaches with a clever business-oriented insights, so you can come up with the segmentation that's right for you for your platform. A very common use segmentation is, hey, let's split customers three ways: new customers, trusted customers, and untrusted customers. What defines a untrusted and untrusted customers? Well, that's up to you to determine with well these data points and approaches that I've mentioned before and that Andre explained really well. So yeah, that's basically it. Yeah, segmenting users. You cannot get started with fraud prevention without segmenting users. The main thing would be, yeah, you want to give good customer experiences, right? So you want to focus on the smallest segment possible that will bring you a better profitability in the future. So try not to bother the good customers, and do bother or frictionate the bad ones, or at least the ones that you consider to be high risk of fraud, right? So yes, definitely fraud segmentation is one of the biggest issues that a business or a data analytics team in fraud prevention sees.
Thanks, Martin. That's great. And one thing I'd emphasize is that fraudsters are really good at adapting their approach once you crack down on a single method or a pattern of behavior. So if you're only tracking refund volume on a per account basis, for example, a fraudster might just find a way to create new accounts every time, like we talked about in that 2 million euro refund fraud scheme. And device intelligence, precise location data can reveal patterns that would be hidden if you're just looking at account level. So I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. Let's go to section 3 here. Our last section is fraud prevention strategies, how to stop refund abuse without alienating customers. So we've covered some pitfalls, some warning signs. The question is now, how do you actually fight back? So let's talk about some tactics for keeping fraudsters at bay, but not harming those good customers that you want to keep coming back to the platform. So let's first go to Martine with a question here. An interesting one for this topic, which is fraud and customer support teams. They often clash when it comes to refunds. Like their goals are a little bit in conflict in some ways. What's the best way to align fraud prevention with customer service?
This is a great one. Going back to something that was mentioned before, I think Andre said it before. Fraud teams tend to be really siloed. Not only like fraud teams that are tackling one type of fraud versus comparing to other fraud teams, but usually fraud teams with the rest of the company. And food delivery is a very logistics center kind of industry. So if you're not speaking with logistics and you're not speaking with operational teams, then you're probably working in silos, and that usually makes you look like the bad guy inside the company. Hey, you're stopping me from giving refunds to the customers and providing good experiences. You're the police. And what I found is really useful in these cases is first of all, with the things that we discussed earlier, build a solid business case so that you can communicate effectively the nature and magnitude of the problem. So make a sizing analysis, provide some examples, and get the right people on the table so you can get those conversations going. You have to be really mindful of the different priorities of the team. Customer service is probably not the area that manages the budget. They just manage what they think the best policy is, and they will probably monitor customer retention and customer satisfaction. But they might not be too concerned about spending a little bit more or a little bit less. So the focus is really different. Um, I would advise you to ask about the processes, as I said before, for you to develop a good understanding of them, and get their input on balancing, like fraud prevention, which usually takes the shape of a friction inside inside this customer service. How to balance that friction with the good customer experience that customer service wants to provide. I will advise you to stay open to solutions. So maybe what the solution that you thought of is not viable for them, but you can negotiate in that way. But a warning in this front would be expect change. I mean, processes will rarely stay the same for long. And if you develop this relationship that I'm speaking about, you will not only be able to convince the customer service team that a fraud prevention strategy is necessary, but you will also be kept in the loop of future changes, or maybe even uh, be a part of deciding what changes need to be done by giving a risk assessment of the proposal before the proposal goes live. Usually that's not the case. Usually we will see a spike in refunds, and we'll try to determine what happened. And when we navigate the app, we see that something's changed, and that created a new risk vector that we didn't think before, that we didn't consider before. So yeah, these are some of the basic alignment points that I would advise you to bring to the table when debating this kind of issues in your company.
Thanks, Martine. Yeah, I think collaboration is such a key part of this challenge as well as so many fraud prevention challenges. So it's really good for teams to keep in mind. Andre, let's go to you next. What's the most effective deterrent you've seen for refund abuse?
Sure. Well, so going back to user segmentation, right? I'd say um, like doing a smart segmentation of users is very important, and especially when it comes to um, flagging accounts that are related, right? So accounts that are related because they all are coming from the same device or from the same location, for example. And not only the customer accounts, but also finding accounts that are related to collusion, right? So this customer account is related to this driver account, and this customer account is related to this seller account, etc. So that is very important because then you can better determine like which accounts are eligible to refunds. Because you may not necessarily want to ban these accounts from your platform completely, um, but you may just want to say, okay, I'm not going to give any refunds to this account anymore because it's related to these other five accounts, and each of these five accounts already requested 10 refunds. So it doesn't make sense for me to keep doing this all the time, right? Um, so that would be one, and then I would also emphasize that having the same signals for all the different parts of the transaction is super important, so that you can identify collusion. Because when when the issue is related to collusion, usually the damage is much bigger because it's a more organized scheme. The scale is different, and it can really hurt the business.
Thanks, Andre. Martine, same question for you. What's the most effective deterrent you've seen for refund abuse?
Okay, so not to repeat myself, I want to focus on one thing here. I mean, we focus a lot on detection and processes. How are fraudsters abusing those processes? My proposals for deterrent would be, what kind of actions do you want to take once you found there's a certain level of risk in a particular refund? So the obvious answer there is, hey, let's block the refund. So you can do that for sure if you have a high certainty there's risk there. But what about the gray areas? I mean, once you start cleaning up your platform, probably those rules that help you stop the most obvious refunds will not be relevant anymore, and you will start seeing like more mixed patterns. And in this case, you have to have a variety of friction tools, and friction tools can have a lot of shapes and flavors, let's say, and it will depend a lot of the customer policies. One example would be the first order customer policy, the first order refund policy that Andre mentioned. You want to take care of those customers. So blocking out the refund outright might be too strong, but you can or maybe add a layer of friction on that. So hey, tell me a little bit about your problem. I'm not ready to give you an automated refund, or maybe you don't have automatic refunds, but you can maybe change the approach and say, hey, yeah, I'm very sad that this is happening to you, but in order to process your refund, uh, I need you to validate your identity by maybe uploading your documents or a selfie or whatever kind of identity validation that you can implement in your platform. So that adds a new layer of friction. And what you see there is usually fraudsters will drop the claim and try another way. Maybe try with a new account, where they will try with a new device or a new methodology. But once you start putting specific frictions to specific targets, then what you see is you disincentivize the behavior. One more example in this would be, what can I do with opportunistic fraud? So I know this customer brings in a lot of completed orders and they bring in a lot of revenue, but I see that they ask for a refund in one out of every four orders, for example. So they make three orders without refunds and an order with refund. But they're heavy users, so they might do this cycle maybe 3 or 4 times in a week because they order 2 or 3 times per day. In these cases, what you can do is, hey, in the first refunds, I will give you the best experience. Once your metrics start deteriorating and the risk starts increasing, I will start adding small layers of friction until you get to a point where you are certain to block the refund. Maybe in the fifth or sixth time the customer does this. But it's important not to let the fraudster turn into a heavy like a heavy fraudster inside your company and make it difficult for them. But making refund abuse costly and inconvenient, you make the customer the real good customers, the legitimate customers, you safeguard their experience by adding small layers of friction. Maybe a customer that has a legitimate problem doesn't mind not having an automated refund. But the fraudster, once they see that they have to talk to an agent and tell the problem and describe the items that are missing and what happened, they might say, hey, yeah, I'm going to skip this claim and try another one. And that's what we see in practice, basically. Once you start adding layers of friction, the fraud behavior changes, usually diminishes, but they are still there. They just are monetizing less. So that would be my answer to sum it up. Targeted and adaptive friction based on the level of risk that you perceive in the refund.
That's great. Thanks, Martin. Andre, last question before we go to Q&A. Kind of a lightning round here. If you want to just cover this quickly, I'm curious if someone on this webinar knows they have a refund fraud issue, but they're not sure how to tackle it, or maybe they've tried some things, hasn't worked very well. What are 1 to 2 things they should go do right now, as soon as this webinar is done, to start fighting back effectively?
Yeah, well, first thing, start with a reliable device ID so that you can identify this like systematic behavior. So if you have a fraudster that manages multiple accounts from the same device, you'll be able to catch it. Then what's going to happen next is the fraudster will adapt and they'll try to use, for example, multiple devices and things like that. So then the next step is start using more behavioral signals, particularly location, so they can see like, okay, I have 5 devices in the same apartment, all of them related to multiple accounts requesting refunds. So I'd say step 1, device ID, step 2, behavioral signals, particularly location.
That's great. Thank you. And I think what we talked about in this section kind of highlights the importance of mixing smart technology like robust device identification, location intelligence, with some of those practical everyday steps, like that collaboration with customer support, and also thinking through like the right process. What's the experience for that user as they're getting a refund request, maybe rejected. So that's great. Great insights. Thanks to both of you. And let's transition to a Q&A time. We've gotten some interesting comments and questions in the chat. So let's see what we can answer in the time we have remaining. One question we had here early on is, how do fraudsters make it time effective to open and operate so many accounts at once? Like we talked about the 137,000 different accounts. Can you give any more specifics about how fraudsters, either of you, are able to make this a little bit more systematic, automated?
Maybe I can take this one. One of the key things that we've been observing is the rise of app cloners. And with that, the fraudster is able to like run multiple instances of the same application on the same device. They don't need to be like logging out from one account and logging in again on the same app. They can have like 15 apps in front of them, and they just switch from one to the next. So this helps the fraudster streamline the process internally. We also see a lot of automation. So yeah, sometimes like you have bots. So the larger scale examples, right? The 2 guys that defrauded like over $2 million, and they were reselling these items on Telegram. They were using a lot of automation, for example. So essentially, like the fraudsters usually have access to multiple tools that help them streamline their processes.
Small comment on this from my part. I would agree like 100% with Andre. It's a matter of automation. So if we are automating stuff on the food delivery platforms, what stops the fraudsters from automating whatever they do to provide their, well, either themselves, or my point was going to be, maybe the fraudster that has the automation skill set is not the one that's actually making the orders. They are selling that as a product. So they will reach out to lots of potential customers, and they're going to say, hey, if you do this way, you will pay 50% for your order. And maybe the end customer, so the customer that actually receives the order, is not the one that has the expertise on this. So it's sometimes difficult to separate these two agents inside the fraud industry, but it's not always the fraudster who is stealing from the company directly, but maybe they are convincing other people, hey, this company, you can steal very easily from them by doing this and that. So definitely automation is the way that they make this happen.
Thanks. And I think the next question may be a little bit related, but we've touched on this a little bit here so far, but I'm curious just to hear any more thoughts on this. What role does fraud as a service play in facilitating refund abuse? We talked about app cloners briefly just now. Our teams noted that app cloners have kind of become like a one-stop shop for fraud. Like they don't just clone apps, they give you actually so many functionalities now. They can give you so many functionalities to do fraud. So I'm curious, any other thoughts you have about fraud as a service, how it plays into this issue of refund abuse?
Yeah, well, it's what Martin just said, right? Like sometimes like these people are just selling the software. They're not even committing the fraud directly, but they have the skills to build these tools, right? And they find that like selling these solutions to multiple people is actually a way where they can make more money and more quickly, and somehow also the risk is a bit lower. Um, so yeah, we see that a lot. Fraud as a service is playing a huge role in this.
Martine, anything you'd add on to that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much what we covered already, but to focus on a particular aspect of this, maybe an advice regarding fraud as a service and how to combat it is to investigate. So we talked about a lot of analyzing data, analyzing the platform navigability and policies. But this is another aspect that you could and should be analyzing. Fraud as a service. They have lots of communities in Telegram, in Facebook, in all social media. They are a community. So they not only sell and buy their fraud tools within those communities, but they also share knowledge, and they also share suspicions or gossip about what might work in some platform and what might not work. We usually see that this is like a small anecdote that we usually see when we start taking sanctions, applying sanctions to couriers and riders, how they discuss this within themselves. Like, why did they sanction me? I don't care that they sanction me because I know that I've been doing illicit stuff, but how did they detect me? And they come up with lots of hypotheses and very educated hypotheses. So they might say, no, this is because you're doing it from the same direct address, you're doing it every time. And maybe we didn't catch them using that, but they know that that is something that we look at. So for becoming a part of this community, not participating, I don't abide for that, but investigating this will also bring you some insights of what are they doing, what kind of tools are available, and what kind of knowledge they are sharing within themselves. So we see this a lot in refund abuse. So hey, if you ask for a refund, then they will give it to you automatically. If they suspect anything, just deny everything, and they will pay you. For example, we saw comments uh, like very similar to that, and that can help you. Hey, is this happening in my platform? Maybe they weren't discussing PedidosYa, but they were saying in another delivery platform, this is the way that to commit fraud. And maybe it's a pattern that I haven't studied inside my own platform, and it's interesting. So this fraud as a service investigation will also spark new insights for you to apply in your platform. So it's not only a prevention, like combating the fraud as a service, but also a prevention strategy to maybe if you're lucky, be a couple steps ahead from the fraudsters. We know that's usually not the case. We're usually chasing them, right? But yeah, I like this fraud as a service concept because it's a whole community that works this way.
Yeah, our team has definitely found some really interesting insights by digging through fraud forums, looking at telegrams, things like that. It's really interesting to see how much fraudsters are willing to share, like even how they support each other. We saw one of my colleagues found an example of like them like encouraging someone not to give up on their fraud scheme, something like that. You know, it's like even though these are kind of anonymous users online, there's this desire for them to support, which is interesting to see. Um, we have maybe one time for one last quick question. Dara asked the question, are you able to link separate accounts, maybe that are doing refunds through the cards that they're using? Martin, curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Basically, yes. That's one of the points that we discussed earlier was what kind of attributes to look at to understand if an account is connected to another account. So the credit card would be one of the main ones. What we see is that usually people using stolen credit cards or monetizing their fraud with credit cards tend to do other types of fraud. I mean, you might have some refund fraud coming with separate accounts using the same credit card, but you more often than not, you will find that those customers that are using a weird credit card, so maybe a new credit card or a shared credit card, they will be looking for high value orders in order to charge back to be yeah, I mean, when the rightful owner of the card sees that in their balance, they're going to charge back, and the platform will pay for the whole of it. In this way, they skip the refund policies. Basically, they don't have to go through refunds because that will be take care of itself when the cardholder contacts their bank. So yes, we use it. What we see is usually, as I said before, it's not the most predictive of refund abuse.
Yeah, that's a great insight. I think that's all the time we have. So that's a wrap for today's webinar. Really appreciate everyone who's joining. It's been great to see lots of comments and really interesting insights that people are sharing in the chat. So thank you for doing that. Hope you got some great ideas today from Martin and Andre that you can apply in your fraud prevention efforts right away, and impact this issue of refund abuse. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending out a recording of this session as soon as it's ready, later today or tomorrow. Feel free to share it with colleagues, revisit parts that are helpful. And if you have additional questions or want to continue the discussion, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn. We'd be happy to answer those questions. And so thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time. And Martin and Andre, thanks a lot for joining.
For
Thank you.
sure. Thank you very much. Thank you all for listening.
Bye, all.